What's your reaction been to the ongoing trade stoush with China? We've been pretty much unable to find anyone in the hunter, either in the coal or wine industries, prepared to say that the tariffs and restrictions will have a huge impact on our area. You might know something differently. Minerals Council doesn't want to get involved. Coal companies don't want to talk. Port Waratah Coal Services doesn't want to talk. Now, that hasn't stopped a lot of people I know from promoting these social media campaigns calling on boycotts of Chinese products. It started with Aussie wineries and vineyards that are actually owned by Chinese businesses, and attention has now turned to other Australian companies that are fully or maybe even partially controlled by foreign interests. Here are some of the social media messages. Time to compile a list of all Australian companies which favour jobs, manufacturing and industry in fascist China in preference to those in Australia. There are plenty and lots of big names. Time to campaign. Buy Aussie, not Chinese. Boycott made in China. Boycott China, stand up for Australia, says another one, and expose all CCP funding in Australia, CCP being the Chinese Communist Party, of course. Now, is this stuff healthy, or is there a possibility that there's an undercurrent of xenophobia which is driving it? Dr. Dvir Abramovich is the chairman of the Anti-Defamation Commission, and he joins me now. Dvir, thanks for doing that, by the way.
Good to be with you as always.
Take us through nationalism firstly. I presume that there are some positive elements of nationalism. It's great to love your country, isn't it? It's great to fly the flag and all the rest of it. There are some positive aspects of sticking up for your country, surely.
Well, the question is, what do you mean by nationalism? If it means people who promote an ideology of white identity, who have xenophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, who oppose multiculturalism and immigration, who embrace the idea of superiority over one's culture, people and nation, then, and pit different social groups against each other, then I don't like this brand of nationalism. I think it's dangerous, and it's a threat to our collective way of life. This is not who we are as a country. The question is, if nationalism means loving your country and the ideals that underpin its societal fabric, if it means cherishing our core values that bind us together, freedom, respect for all, equality, inclusivity, then I applaud that approach in philosophy. Now, you can call it nationalism, you can call it patriotism, or you can simply call it the Aussie way. But I do think that, we're in a common situation. We're in a situation of common pain because of COVID-19 and because of this trade war, and we have to find common ground, and that doesn't happen by singling out people.
Isn't it interesting, though? It's these moments of high pressure, of course, that bring out the worst in us. And I just wonder whether this is a human trait all around the world, that you don't seem to have to scratch very deeply to discover racism in human beings.
Yes. I mean, we know from history that at times of monumental crisis in society, those ugly impulses that lurk beneath the surface tend to manifest and express themselves with full force. We also know that the voices of reason and logic can be drowned out by those who wish to spread hatred, to sow discord, conspiracy theories. And this is what we have seen recently. I have to say that the level of hatred and vitriol that has been aimed at Chinese Australians, Asian Australians on social media is simply staggering. And we have to be very careful that when we spoke about nationalism doesn't become a vehicle and a tool for malicious stereotyping, for dog whistling, for demonization. We really have to make sure that we don't create an atmosphere of xenophobia and bigotry against Chinese Australians.
Was there the risk that nationalism would rise in this country in any event? I mean, we've seen through political parties, and I don't want to single any out, of course, but some we would consider on objective analysis to be more closely aligned to the right. And while they haven't propagated the kind of stuff that we've seen in the United States, there was obviously the prospect, even pre-COVID, of the political system in Australia reflecting some sort of desire within the population to, stand up for Australian interests over others.
Well, as you know, this week we had an 18-year-old teenager from New South Wales. I think he's 18. He was arrested for expressing neo-Nazi and white supremacist views and has been charged with encouraging a mass casualty terrorist attack. Last month we had fire art terror plotter Philip Galea, who was planning to wage war against Muslims and leftists. He was jailed for 12 years. We know that the fast-spreading coronavirus pandemic really presented white supremacists, the alt-right, far-right extremists, with an opportunity to insert themselves into the conversation, to seize on the fear and anxiety and to spread hate. And that is the problem, that these individuals are always looking for a space. They're wanting to hijack the public debate. And nationalism can be very dangerous. And in fact, I saw a poll that was conducted by Essential Media on behalf of the Asian Australian Alliance. They surveyed, I think, more than 1,000 Australians in August. And it's interesting that 31% believe that it was definitely or probably true that those cases were brought to Australia by the Chinese people. So there is a danger there, and I think what we need to do now is we have to be the light walkers. We have to be the ones who are sort of looking at what binds us together, what brings us together as a nation. You know, great things have been done because we stand shoulder to shoulder and lock arms. So nationalism can be very dangerous if it's manipulated and exploited. I mean, we remember that during World War II, more than 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of them U.S. citizens, were rounded up and sent to internment camps. So we want to avoid any kind of sentiment that singles out and vilifies anyone who is from Asia, anyone who is from China.
It's interesting, isn't it, because there will be personal protests. I remember a mate that I grew up with, his dad served in the Second World War. He just refused to buy DVD players and, you know, Japanese cars and stuff. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. So I guess there'll be some level of personal sentiment that some people might feel, and they might act in a way that they consider to be practical. But propagating that sort of thinking can't be helpful, surely.
Well, I think we are in a moral moment in this country, you know, when the garden of our democracy is being infected by the weeds of bigotry. And there may be blowback against Chinese Australians, against Asian Australians, unless we, and I'm going to use the words that President Lincoln once used, you know, summon the better angels of our nature to stop the demonization of this community. We have to call out the blame game and the scapegoating that's playing out in some corners of our society. And we have to come together to defeat this stigmatization, because we have to, in a sense, show our children what it really means to be an Aussie. And that means that we respect everybody and that we honor the sacrifices that every single citizen is making. And I would hate for Chinese Australians to be blamed for the actions of what's happening in China.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as Australians, we can quite clearly distinguish between Donald Trump and Americans. You know, we just think Donald's on a different planet as Australians. And this is, you know, putting aside the political aspects of being a Republican versus being a Democrat. In Australia, we don't know much about that and the distinctions and don't get involved in it. But we just see the behaviours and say, OK, well, that's just Donald. We don't say that's Americans. So why is it that we can't effectively distinguish between the actions of dictatorial regimes, you know, the Chinese Communist Party, for example, and distinguish between them and the people that they're supposed to represent?
Well, I think we need to. I mean, the trade war, China's infringement of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, you know, its beefing up of territorial claims in the South China Sea. These are legitimate points for debate and criticism, and we should. But no one should be blaming Chinese Australians for the actions of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, it's wrong, it's immoral, and it must stop. And I just want to say that really this is an opportunity for each one of us to support our fellow Chinese Australians. These are decent, hardworking people. They're our neighbors, our friends, they're teachers, they're business owners, they're doctors, they're nurses, you know, who have been given selfless services and sacrifices to combat the virus on the front lines. They are brothers and sisters, and they deserve our backing. So we really need to make sure that we don't single out and victimize those who are really innocent bystanders in all this.
Speaking of innocent bystanders, I was very impressed with an Australian winemaker, just a minor player, I can't even remember his name, who featured in an ABC Online article. He was, while he was worried about his own future, he was worried about the Chinese importers that he sold to. He said some of them had essentially been bankrupted overnight by the stroke of a pen.
Well, the real victims of this friction, this power play, you know, on the international scale, are ordinary individuals on both sides. And there'll be businesses that have been long established fixtures within their communities, both here and in China, that will experience a significant decline and will suffer huge losses. So we have to remember that this economic impact will take a toll on the families. So instead of re-victimizing these casualties of a battle that is unfolding on an international level, we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. And I just want to say that in the face of this escalating trade war and difficult economic times, we must face these circumstances together. We cannot allow fear and misinformation to divide us. And that's why I call on politicians. We need leadership that is grounded in truth and is committed in taking on racism and xenophobia directly. So we need to really take, I would say, tangible steps to counter the hysteria around the coronavirus, but also the trade disputes. So we can, and we will come through this economic crisis, but only if we work together. Only if we work together.
Dvir, nice to talk to you as usual. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Dr. Dvir Abramovich is the chair of the Anti-Defamation Commission. You might have some views on that.